I wasn't planning on going anywhere, not really. The trip sort of fell into my lap. My boss offered me 2 weeks off after a project we'd been grinding on for months, finally wrapped up. "You've earned it," he said. Maybe I had, but in truth, I think I needed a break from more than just work. Things hadn't been right for a while. At home, with myself, sleep came slow, dreams felt heavy, and my old house, the one I inherited from my aunt 2 years ago, had started to feel less like a home and more like a weight pressing on my chest. Creaking floors, lights flickering, strange cold spots in the hallway. I chalked it all up to age, faulty wiring, and my imagination running wild. So when my best friend Liz told me she'd booked a cabin upstate and asked if I wanted to come, I said yes without thinking. Fresh air, long hikes, no reception, and no responsibilities. It sounded like the kind of reset button I was desperate to press. The morning I left, everything seemed fine. I double-checked the doors, unplugged appliances, set the motion lights outside, and activated the security cameras I'd installed last winter. It felt like a clean break. I even remember pausing on the front porch, glancing back at the house. For a second, I felt, I don't know, uneasy, like someone was watching from one of the upstairs windows. But when I looked, there was nothing there, just the soft curtain I always forget to fix swaying gently. The drive to the cabin was long, but peaceful. Trees replaced highways, and as soon as I got out of the car and smelled pine and wet moss, something inside me loosened. Liz was already there, wine bottle in hand and a fire going. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. The days passed easily. We cooked, hiked, read paperbacks on the porch. No signal meant no distractions. I didn't check my phone much, barely at all. But a few days in, I noticed a missed call. Unknown number, no message. I shrugged it off, probably spam. But then came a second one, then a third, both from the same number. Still, no voicemail. On the 6th night, just before bed, I had a weird dream. In it, I was back at home. My front door was open. Wind was howling through the hall. Something was calling me from upstairs. Not someone, something. I woke up sweating, heart racing. I didn't tell Liz. I didn't want to be that person who brings horror movie vibes to a peaceful retreat. Still, something gnawed at me. The calls, the dream, the curtains swaying. I told myself it was just my overactive imagination. That's what everyone always told me growing up, that I let my mind wander too far, saw things that weren't there, heard things that didn't exist. But what if this time it was different? I ended up staying the full 2 weeks, even though I felt a strange pull to go back early, like something was waiting for me. But I didn't want to ruin the trip, and I didn't have any real reason to cut it short. So I stayed, right up until the end. When I pulled into my driveway 2 weeks later, it was almost dusk. The sun was dipping below the trees, casting long shadows over the lawn. Everything looked normal, at least at first. My porch light was on, though I'd left it off. A small detail, easy to overlook, but it was the first crack in what I thought was a calm return. Then my neighbor, Mr. Halverson, appeared at the edge of his yard. He's a quiet man in his 60s, always watering his lawn or tinkering in his garage. He never really talks much until that day. He looked at me like he wasn't sure I was real. "You okay?" he asked, stepping closer. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Just got back." He hesitated, then said the words that changed everything. "There was screaming coming from your house. A few nights. Thought you were back early." I stared at him, confused. "What kind of screaming?" He looked away for a moment, then back at me, like someone was trapped or fighting. It wasn't just once. I felt something shift inside me then. A coldness, an echo of the dream. The wind through the hall, the voice from upstairs. I laughed it off, told him maybe a raccoon got inside. But my hand was trembling when I unlocked the front door, and as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something wasn't right. Something had changed. And this trip, the one that was supposed to be a break, was only the beginning. The first thing I did when I got inside was drop my bag and just stand there listening. At first, all I heard was silence, not the comforting kind, the kind that feels wrong, a silence that feels full, like it's pressing against your skin. I walked slowly through the living room, flicking on lights one by one. Everything looked more or less as I had left it. But there were subtle differences. The throw blanket on the couch had been folded differently. A dining chair was slightly off angle, and the hallway smelled faintly of something metallic, like rust or blood. I told myself it was in my head, that Mr. Halverson had spooked me, that I'd forgotten how eerie my own house could feel after dark. I went upstairs, opened all the bedroom doors, even checked the closets. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no scratches or footprints. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't empty. I barely slept that first night back. Every creak of the wood or groan of the pipes made me sit up, wide-eyed. Around 2 a.m., I finally got up and went to the kitchen for some water. That's when I noticed the blinking light on my phone. I hadn't checked it properly since coming home, just plugged it in and ignored it. There was one new voicemail. It was from the same unknown number that had called me during the trip. 3 times, no message left. Something in me hesitated. My finger hovered over the play button, but then I instinctively went to delete it. It was late and I didn't want to deal with some spam call or worse, a prank. But right as I was about to erase it, something stopped me. A sound, faint but unmistakable. The voicemail had auto-played for half a second, and in that second, I heard what I can only describe as a whisper. My name. My actual name. I froze. I replayed it from the start, hand shaking slightly. The message was only 12 seconds long, but it felt like it stretched time. At first, all I could hear was static, not the kind you get from a bad connection. This was deeper, rougher, like interference from another frequency. Then came the whisper again. My name, drawn out, slow, almost loving. Then something else. The sound of movement, like dragging, and finally a voice, different from the first, saying, he knows you left. And then it ended. I stood there for a long time, staring at the screen. I must have played it 10 times, each time listening for something more, something hidden beneath the layers. But it was always the same. Static, my name, dragging sounds, and that sentence, he knows you left. I couldn't make sense of it. Who was he? Why would someone say that? Was it a prank, someone messing with me because they knew I was out of town? But that didn't make sense either. I hadn't told anyone but Liz I was going away, and I don't exactly have a social circle full of tricksters. The next morning I tried calling the number back. No ringtone, just an automated message saying the number wasn't in service. Classic horror movie cliche, I thought. But it wasn't funny anymore. Not after what I heard. I showed the voicemail to Liz that same day. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. That's not okay, she said, clutching her sweater around her like she was suddenly cold. That voice, that's not a normal voice. We sat in silence for a moment before she asked, you said your neighbor heard screaming? I nodded. While I was gone, she frowned. You don't think someone broke in, do you? Like someone living there while you were away? That thought hadn't even crossed my mind until she said it. I felt a chill rise through me. Could someone have been squatting in my house, watching the cameras, waiting until I left? But the locks were fine, the windows sealed, and even more unsettling, none of the footage I checked on my security system showed anything out of place. That night, I called a technician to help retrieve the deleted recordings from the system, just in case, but something told me whatever had happened, it had avoided being caught on camera. The next evening I got another call from the same number. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it light up. This time I answered, but no one spoke, only breathing, soft, steady and close. I stayed on the line, barely breathing myself. Then, after 23 seconds, it hung up. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a break-in. This was personal. Someone or something had been in my house. And they didn't just want to scare me, they wanted me to know they were still here. Whatever I'd almost deleted, it was meant for me. A warning, a message, a threat. And I was starting to think it wasn't over. I couldn't stop hearing his voice. There was screaming coming from your house. Mr. Halverson's words echoed in my head every time I closed my eyes. They weren't said with drama or concern. They were almost casual, but that made them worse, like he'd accepted the unexplainable as just another strange thing to file away. After I listened to that second call, the one with only breathing, I couldn't pretend anymore. I wasn't just creeped out, I was afraid. Something was wrong here, and it had been happening long before I came back home. The next morning, I walked across the lawn and knocked on Mr. Halverson's door. He answered almost immediately, as if he'd been expecting me. He had a way of looking through people, not at them. I asked him to tell me everything, and to my surprise, he did. He said the first time he heard the screaming was on a Tuesday night, around midnight. He'd been watching TV with the volume low, like he always did, when he heard it, muffled but sharp, like someone crying out in panic. At first, he thought it might have come from the woods behind our houses, but then it happened again and again, always late at night, always from my house. Sometimes a single shout, sometimes long, drawn-out wailing. "I thought you were home early," he said. "Didn't want to pry." He told me he walked over once, stood at the edge of my porch and listened. The lights were off, no movement in the windows, but he swore he heard footsteps inside, pacing, a rhythm to it, back and forth. Then silence. I asked him why he didn't call the police. "I almost did," he said. "But every time I convinced myself to pick up the phone, the noise would stop. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone had been in my house, or something, and they had waited for me to leave. They'd used my home like it belonged to them. But why the screaming? Who was screaming?" I checked my security footage again, this time scanning through the specific nights Halverson mentioned, and once again, nothing. No triggered motion, no doors opening, no figures moving in the shadows. My cameras had captured 12 nights of absolute stillness, but that didn't match what he described, not even close. And that's when it hit me. What if whatever was happening didn't want to be seen? What if it existed outside of normal time, outside of normal rules? I had to consider the possibility, as absurd as it sounded, that this wasn't just a person, that maybe this wasn't someone at all. Later that day, I called the police just to file a report. The officer I spoke to was polite but skeptical. No signs of forced entry, no concrete evidence, no injuries or damage. "Sounds like maybe a prank," he said, "or a neighbor playing around with a speaker. You know, Bluetooth stuff." But I could tell he didn't believe it, and neither did I. There's a difference between hearing a sound and feeling it. Mr. Halverson felt it. I felt it too now, in the bones of this house, in the cold spots that came and went without explanation, in the dreams that were no longer just dreams. That night I left every light on. I sat in the living room with the curtains wide open. I didn't play music, I didn't watch TV, I just listened. At around 2:13 a.m., I heard it, faint at first, a soft, breathless sound coming from the hallway. I stood up slowly. It grew louder, a whimper, low, desperate. It wasn't just sound, it carried emotion, fear, pain, grief. I moved toward it, heart racing, knees weak. As I turned the corner into the hallway, the air felt thick, like walking underwater. The noise stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. My hands were shaking. I looked at the attic door, which hadn't been opened in years. And then, clear as day, I heard it again. A scream, not from above, but from inside the wall, long, sharp, full of rage. My heart nearly exploded in my chest. I ran back into the living room and dialed Liz. She picked up on the second ring. "There's something in my house," I said, voice cracking. "I heard it, the screaming, just like he said." She stayed on the phone with me until dawn. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. I just waited. But the house didn't give me anything else that night. It was as if it knew I was finally listening. The next morning felt different. I woke not because of an alarm, but because the house was too quiet, unnaturally still. The kind of quiet that made your ears ring, that made you feel like something was holding its breath just out of sight. After the night I'd had, I expected to feel exhausted, but I didn't. I felt wired, alert, like my body knew something my mind wasn't ready to process. I stood in the center of the living room for several minutes, just looking around. Sunlight was creeping through the blinds in slats, cutting across the walls and carpet like blades. The light made everything seem normal, almost peaceful. But I'd been fooled by that before. Something was wrong here, and whatever it was, it hadn't left. I started checking each room more carefully, methodically, not just a glance this time, but a full inspection. I moved furniture, opened drawers, checked behind curtains. I wanted to believe I wouldn't find anything, that my fear had made everything feel bigger than it was. But I was past the point of convincing myself. I needed answers, even if they scared me. In the kitchen, one of the cabinet doors wouldn't open. It wasn't stuck. It was locked from the inside. That made no sense. There was no mechanism on the inside of those cabinets, no lock. I tried again, harder. It wouldn't budge. In the hallway, I noticed the mirror had shifted slightly. I don't mean it tilted. I mean it had moved down the wall by about an inch. The nail it usually hung from was now completely exposed, and a new lower one had been hammered into the drywall. I hadn't done that, and no one else should have been in this house. Yet there it was, repositioned, like someone needed to see their reflection from a different height. Then I got to the guest bedroom, the room I never used, the room that still smelled faintly like the lavender detergent my aunt used before she passed. I didn't like going in there, not because it was creepy, but because it felt frozen in time, preserved, like she was still supposed to come back. I opened the door slowly. At first glance, everything seemed untouched. The bed made, the bookshelf organized, the window shut tight. But when I stepped in, I noticed the carpet near the corner of the room had a dark patch, faint but visible. I knelt down and touched it. It was dry, but the color, it looked like old blood, not red, brown, set deep into the fibers. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. Then came the worst part. On the desk, resting gently atop a stack of unused stationery, was a small porcelain figurine, a ballerina, about 6 inches tall, pale pink dress, arms raised overhead in perfect form. It had belonged to my aunt. She kept it in a box in the attic with her keepsakes. I hadn't seen it in years, and now it was here, clean, centered, as if placed intentionally. I picked it up, and on the underside was a name scratched faintly into the ceramic. Not my aunt's name, my name. That's when I realized this wasn't random. Someone or something wanted me to find it. This was a message, a statement. You are not alone. I took a step back, heart pounding. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, like all the oxygen had been sucked out. I turned to leave and froze. On the wall, where the door stood half open, was a handprint, smudged and dark, just above the handle. Too high for a child, too small for an adult male, and definitely too fresh to have been my aunt's. I backed out of the room slowly, closed the door, and locked it. I returned to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water and didn't drink it. I just stood there, glass in hand, staring out the window. Something had been moving through this house in my absence. But more than that, it had been observing, repositioning things, testing boundaries, leaving breadcrumbs, not to hide, but to be seen. I pulled out my phone and started reviewing the footage again. But this time, instead of skipping through quickly, I slowed it down, frame by frame. And in one clip, the morning before I left for the trip, I saw something. As I walked out the front door, locking up, something flickered in the hallway behind me. A shadow, a shape. It was only for a split second, but it was there. Not enough detail to see clearly, but enough to know. I was never alone, not even before I left. I don't know what made me go back and look again. Maybe it was the ballerina, maybe it was the blood stain on the carpet. Or maybe it was the voice in that voicemail still ringing in the back of my mind. He knows you left. Whatever it was, I sat down at my computer that night, poured myself a second cup of coffee I didn't need, and opened the security footage once again. This time, I wasn't looking for motion. I wasn't looking for an intruder. I was looking for the in-between moments, the ones we usually skip over because they seem empty, still, safe. I began with the footage from the first day I was away. At a glance, nothing was wrong. The house sat silent in the camera's lens, but I paused, zoomed in, slowed it down. Every 15 seconds I advanced the frames. It was tedious work. My eyes burned, my legs went numb, but I had to keep going. On the third night, just after 2:30 a.m., I saw it. A flicker, barely perceptible, passed across the frame in the upstairs hallway. The feed glitched for half a second, then nothing. At first, I thought it was just a technical error. Cameras can be finicky, especially when they record for hours on end. But I rewound, paused again, frame by frame, and then I saw her. A figure, female, I think. Pale face, black hair hanging in strands. She was standing at the far end of the hallway, her body slightly turned toward the camera, but her face obscured by shadows. She wasn't there in one frame, then she was, then gone again, like she'd been stitched into the footage by hand. I stared at the screen, heart racing. She didn't move, she didn't blink, but she was watching. I pulled up footage from the following night. This time I didn't have to wait long. Around 3 a.m., a door opened on its own, just slightly. Enough to reveal the same hallway, and there she was again. Closer this time, standing in the middle of the hall, body facing away from the camera, head turned just enough that her profile could be made out, lips slightly parted, eyes hollow. She never walked, never approached. She simply appeared, always standing, always in silence. I switched to the footage from the guest bedroom, the room with the bloodstain. I hadn't reviewed it before because I assumed it would be like the rest, empty. But that night, I felt like I had to know. At 3:17 a.m., the camera glitched again, this time much more violently. The screen went black for 2 full seconds. When it came back, something had changed. The room was darker, like the light itself had been drained. And in the corner, just barely in the edge of the frame, something was crouching, not standing. Crouching. Its limbs were too long. Arms bent unnaturally, almost spider-like. The head was tilted back at an impossible angle. And I could swear I saw it breathing, not smoothly but in harsh, irregular gasps. Then one by one the books from the nearby shelf began to fall. Not violently, gently, like they were being plucked off by invisible fingers. And just before the feed cut to black again, the creature, or whatever it was, turned its head toward the camera and smiled. I slammed my laptop shut. I couldn't breathe. My skin felt like it was vibrating. I wanted to throw up. I backed away from the desk and leaned against the wall, my legs nearly giving out. This wasn't just something wrong with the house. This wasn't just some presence. This was deliberate, intelligent, aware. This thing had been in my house, moving when it wanted, vanishing at will, watching me, studying me, playing with my perception of what was real and what was safe. And worst of all, it knew the cameras were there. It let me see just enough to unravel me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat in the living room with every light on, a knife in my hand, like it could somehow protect me from something that moved through walls and appeared in blacked-out frames. The next morning, I called Liz again. I told her what I saw, every detail. "I need you to see it too," I said. "Please, just tell me I'm not losing my mind." She hesitated, then said something that chilled me deeper than anything else. "Maybe you weren't supposed to find that footage," she whispered. "Maybe it was hiding for a reason." She was right, because whatever I saw that night, I wasn't meant to see it. And now that I had, something had changed. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was coming closer. There was one place I hadn't looked, Not really. The basement had always been the one area of the house I avoided, not because it was creepy in the usual horror movie way, but because it held too much of my aunt. After she passed, I locked the basement door and only went down there when absolutely necessary, flipping breakers, checking for leaks. I always told myself I'd clean it out one day, but I never did. I didn't want to stir the dust of her memories. And if I'm honest, part of me was scared of what I might find. But after everything, the figurine, the voicemails, the screaming, the footage, something inside me knew that whatever was happening didn't just include the basement. It was centered there. It was always there. That evening, I stood at the top of the stairs with a flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other, recording, because if I found something, I needed proof. The moment I unlocked the door, a wave of cold air hit me. Not the kind of cold you expect from underground spaces, but something more unnatural, still, heavy, like the basement had been sealed in ice that refused to thaw. I descended slowly, each step groaning beneath me like it was trying to warn me away. The beam from my flashlight quivered, not from batteries dying, but from my hand. My breathing was loud in the silence. The only sound, until it wasn't. Halfway down I heard something, a creak, a soft scrape, like fingernails dragging across concrete. I froze, listened, nothing. But I knew I wasn't alone, not anymore. At the bottom of the stairs, the smell hit me, stale earth, mildew, and something sharper, iron, the scent of blood that had long dried, but never truly left. I stepped into the basement and swept the flashlight across the room. The familiar boxes, the old furniture under sheets, a dusty washer and dryer that hadn't been used in years. But something felt different. The far corner, just behind a stack of boxes, caught my eye. There was a section of wall I didn't remember being there before. It was slightly discolored, with faint marks around the edges, like it had been opened recently. I moved the boxes aside, revealing a small wooden panel, almost like a hidden door. My stomach dropped. It had no knob, just a slit along the side. I slipped my fingers into it and pulled. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passage, less like a room, more like a tunnel. It shouldn't have been there. The house's blueprints, which I'd seen after my aunt's death, made no mention of a sub-basement. But there it was. And it smelled wrong. I shined my light inside. There were chains bolted into the walls, rusted, old, but definitely used. Deep scratch marks lined the stone floor, and what looked like dried, splattered blood painted the lower wall like a grotesque mural. In the center of the space was a wooden chair, broken at one leg, tipped over on its side. And then I saw them. Photos, dozens of them. Tacked to the walls, scattered across the ground. Black and white, color, Polaroids. All of people, some with terrified expressions, some asleep, some staring directly at the camera. And in several of them, I saw myself, sleeping, walking, standing at my front door, taken from angles inside my own home. But it was the last photo that stopped my breath. It was of my aunt, bound to the same broken chair, mouth open mid-scream, her eyes wide with the kind of fear I'd never seen on her face. On the back of the photo, written in a sharp, trembling hand, were 3 words, "He still listens." I dropped it. Every hair on my body stood up. A sound echoed from the tunnel behind me. Not a growl, not a whisper, something worse. A breath, close, heavy, wet. I turned and ran. I don't remember climbing the stairs. I don't remember locking the basement door behind me. All I remember is collapsing against the wall, heart pounding so violently I thought I might pass out. He still listens. The house was never just haunted. It was never just watched. It was used. Used to hold something. And someone, my aunt, maybe others before her, had known, had tried to contain it. Maybe she lived here not by choice, but because she was guarding the gate. And when she died, the house passed to me. So did the secret. So did the burden. Only I hadn't been guarding it. I'd left. I'd opened the door. And now it knows I know. The house isn't waiting anymore. It's waking up. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another eerie tale. Got a theory about what's really inside that basement? Drop it in the comments below. We read everything. And remember, sometimes the scariest part of a story is knowing it might be real. Stay curious, stay cautious.